I guess I could call my dad, but we're already running late. And I don't know that he'd know what to do anyway. Okay, so we can't use the new site because we don't have sound. Still nothing? Oh, so you mean it's recording on the computer? Okay. Okay, we're ready to start. We're running a little late. We can't get the computer to work the way we want it, so we'll just get started. Mike Shoemaker, would you open us in prayer? Thanks.
Lord, thank you for this day together on your Lord's Day. We ask your blessing on our study this morning and our sermon after that.
Amen. Okay, well, you can turn to Job chapter 40. This is our 42nd week in Job. Where we are now, Jesus has come to Job in a golden whirlwind. He's trying to restore Job's relationship with God. 2 weeks ago, we looked at Job's first reply to Jesus. That was in Job chapter 40, verses 3 through 5. After Jesus gave his speeches about the animals, here's what Job said. Then Job answered the Lord and said, "Behold, I am vile. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further." So Job bows before God, basically. He admits that he's unworthy of being before God, but he does not repent. He says, I don't deserve any attention from God. He sensed the holiness of God, but he's not confessing his sins, and he says, I won't say anything else. And obviously, Jesus is not satisfied with Job's reply. And we know that because Jesus continues to talk for 2 more chapters. So if you turn to verses 6 through 8 of chapter 40, here's how Jesus continues his speech. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you indeed annul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you may be justified? Now this is exactly the same way Jesus started in chapter 38, but he adds something new there in verse 8. He says to Job, Are you going to try to annul my providence? Will you condemn God to justify yourself? So Jesus is asking Job, are you really going to say that God is evil so that you can be righteous? This is a matter of pride for Job. He was broken and he was crushed in almost every way, and yet, as a human, he is still able to hold on to pride, deep, deep pride. This is the same sin that caused Lucifer to fall, which is pride. There seem to be 2 reasons, then, why Jesus is falsely accusing God. The first reason Jesus dealt with in the first 2 chapters, 38 and 39, ignorance. Job was ignorant of what God was doing. And so because he was ignorant, he made up ideas in his mind that were wrong about why God was doing it. It's also because progressive revelation is very incomplete at this point. The book of Job is the first book of the Bible written, so there's nothing else on paper written by God. And of course, the book of Job isn't even written yet for Job. It's 100 years later, at least, maybe 500 years later. So all he knows about God is incomplete. So Jesus tries to correct some of Job's ignorance in the first couple of chapters. Job and his friends have all wrong ideas about God. But now Jesus is coming to the second reason for Job's false accusations, and the second reason is pride. Job was overconfident in his righteousness. So the words of Jesus are starting to soften his hard heart, but they haven't completely melted his heart yet. He's still frozen. Jesus wants to completely fix Job, not just fix him halfway. So I think these last 2 chapters of Jesus' speech to Job is Jesus trying to frighten Job with a glimpse of the spiritual dangers around him. Job doesn't recognize how deeply this goes. He needs a good scare, like Halloween monsters, to remind him that he needs God's protection. He keeps saying, God, leave me alone. God, leave me alone. And Jesus is saying, Job, if I leave you alone, you're toast. You don't want me to leave you alone. So, the first scenario that Jesus starts, which is a scary scenario, is a man becoming God. Jesus basically says to Job, how would the world be better if you were God? Shall we try it? He says, do you have an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Job condemned God in order to justify himself. Job thought he was righteous, while God is cruel and petty. So Jesus takes this line of thinking to its logical conclusion. Job, you think you're better than God, so how about if you were God? How would that work out for the world? The truth is, it wouldn't be a comedy. There have been a couple of comedies done where humans had the power of God, and it never works out, and it can't. There's a number of reasons for that. The truth is, it would be a tragedy. Lord Acton in the 19th century said, or wrote, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, this is not true of God, because God has absolute power, but he's not corrupt. But if you were to take any created being and give him absolute power, or her, you would have disaster. If you had the power of God, what would you do? Would you make yourself rich? You know these movies about genies coming out of a bottle and they'll give you 3 wishes? You try to think of what 3 things you would take if you had that power. If the genie gave you what you wanted. Would you be rich? Would you be handsome? Would you live forever? So God asks Job if you can match God's power, and the answer is no. Then Jesus says, can you thunder like God? But the word thunder can also mean terror. So can you cause terror like God? Can Job terrify very many people? Probably not. Certainly not in his current state. The idea of Job becoming God is not an offer. Jesus isn't saying, hey, would you like to be God? I'll trade you for a week. No, nothing like that. If that was to happen, the universe would be destroyed because Job couldn't handle it. It would just fall apart. But on the other hand, there's also the hint here of Jesus the Messiah in the future, because there will be a day when a man will be God, and it's just not going to be Job. It's Jesus. So then in verse 10, Jesus asks Job, are you beautiful like God? Can you clothe yourself with majesty and splendor and glory and beauty? The reason for that is God wants us to know that not only is he powerful and all-knowing, etc., he also is beautiful. In fact, there's nothing in the universe that's more beautiful than God. He's at least, well, I don't even know how to talk about it. It's hard to say how is beauty when it's invisible, because God is invisible. I guess it's because of his attributes. It's the beauty of personality. So as opposed to thinking you or I or Rebecca or someone you know is beautiful, when you're talking about God being beautiful, it's definitely of the personality rather than the appearance. The appearance is also beautiful, I guess, but I don't know how to describe it. Colors? How do you describe something you can't see? But anyway, this is also another reason to believe in the creation, because the creation is so full of beauty. God made things beautiful. Why? What good would it do to make anything beautiful unless there were beings who could appreciate it and love it? So God gives us pleasure by giving us beauty. And God is beautiful. But all the beauty on earth is derived from God himself. And so all of our art that we think is beautiful are just shallow reflections of God's beauty. This is a part of the Bible. In Psalm 27, verses 4 and 5, it says, David wants to live in the house of the Lord forever. Why does he want to live in the house of the Lord forever? To behold the beauty of the Lord. Isaiah 28:5 says that in that day the Lord of hosts will be a beautiful crown and a glorious diadem to the remnant of his people. So Jesus tells Job, I'm beautiful. God is beautiful. You have no idea how beautiful he is. But Jesus has one more challenge for Job as a human, and that's in verses 11 to 14. Disperse the rage of your wrath. Look on everyone who is proud and humble him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their places. Hide them in the dust together. Bind their faces in hidden darkness. So Jesus says Job lacks God's power. Job lacks God's beauty. And now Job lacks justice, or the wrath of God. Job cannot be just in the manner needed for a number of reasons. The first one that Jesus tells us about, the reason he can't be just is because he cannot see everyone. He can't read minds. He can't know who is evil. Jesus says, look on the evil and trample him down. Okay, well, how do you find the evil? How is Job going to do that? He can't. Job is not all omniscient and all-seeing. And then Jesus says, not only can you not see everything, you can't find everyone. They hide in their places. How are you going to find them, Job? And then, of course, Job doesn't have the power to bring justice. So Jesus challenges Job on all these points and says, you humans cannot be like God. You can't do what you say you want. You want justice. But the fact of the matter is, you can't have justice by yourself. I'm the only one who can give you justice. So you don't want me to leave, or you will get no justice. Yeah, if you really wanted justice, if you had justice all the time, you wouldn't be sitting here. Yeah, we like the idea of justice on other people. We don't want the justice on us, because that would be harmful to us. So at any rate, the first challenge to Job from Jesus regarding his pride is, you would make a terrible God. Okay, so you don't want to be alone. You need God. You need me. Now the last verse was Job 40:14. Then I will confess to you that your own right hand can save you. In other words, Job, if you were omnipotent and omniscient and beautiful, you could save yourself. But since you're not, you can't. You have no way of saving yourself, which means I'm the only one who can save you, so you need me. So for 35 chapters, though, Job's been saying, God, you're cruel. God, you're petty. I can't trust you. You don't care about people. You didn't care about my kids. I wish you would leave me alone so I can die in peace. So that's what Job's been saying for dozens of chapters. And Jesus' first response was, no, Job, you're being ignorant and foolish. You don't understand God. But now Jesus says, no, Job, you would die. You would be petrified in fear if I left you alone. You wouldn't die in peace. The monsters would get you. So now we come to this next section, which is about Behemoth and Leviathan. And we're going to be here for at least several weeks. It's a very important piece of the book of Job, and it's also one of the most mysterious parts of the Bible. Since Job is my favorite Bible book, and the last 4 chapters of Job are my favorite passage in the Bible, along with Psalm 104, which is a parallel, I've spent decades thinking about this. Now, it doesn't mean that I know everything about it, and it doesn't mean that I'm right about everything about it. It just means that I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and so I hope I have some useful ideas. Curiosity is the one word I use to define myself. When people ask me, what are you like? I'm curious. And the book of Job is certainly curious to me. And I'm especially curious about ancient history and animals. And since these chapters deal with ancient history and animals, that makes it even more interesting to me. Now, a lot of pastors and commentators, most people will not touch these verses, or at least they touch them very superficially. And the reason is they don't like to speculate much. So in order to not speculate, they just parrot what they read to save time also. It means they don't have to study it a lot. They justify this superficial approach because they think speculation is evil. But speculation is not evil. Speculation is creativity or imagination. It is only a tool. You can use speculation badly and you can use speculation goodly. I don't think goodly is a word. You can use it well. So anyway, it's neither good or bad. It's a tool. It helps you to think outside the box. It's a lot safer inside the box because no one will criticize you. If you just say the same thing everyone else says, everyone says, yay, you got it right, we think, because everyone else said it that way. Of course, they don't think of the problem of lemmings. Lemmings all think they're right, and they all go over the same cliff together. Now, in this case, it's not a matter of life and death, and deciding who Behemoth and Leviathan are wrongly will not affect your salvation. It's only a matter of theological interest. But anyway, speculation is not evil. One reason it looks evil sometimes is because when you come up with new ideas, people assume that new ideas are wrong. And that's often true of the Bible. Usually, you'd like to think that good, godly men in the past would come to the same conclusions that you have. And that's because God is true, and truth is truth, and so truth doesn't change. Well, that's true. Truth does not change. However, you can find new truth. And the reason is that God gives certain people gifts or changes even the circumstances we live in, the history, to learn new things. For example, in 1948, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And they've started a whole new chapter on Bible translation because now we have Old Testament books from before the time of Christ. So we now have better translations than the Septuagint. The Septuagint was the Greek version of the Old Testament, and our oldest copy was like 500 AD. Now we've got copies of the Bible from 100 BC. That changes everything. So we do find new truth because the Dead Sea Scrolls have shown there were a few little errors in the Septuagint. Another thing that happens is archaeology. And sometimes in archaeology we discover new things. And the reason is, particularly for the book of Job. I told you that the book of Job has several places, including the word behemoth, which is a hapax legomena, which is Latin for one time, one written. When you find a book or a word in the Bible that only occurs once, it's very difficult to translate it right, because all you can do is compare it to words that are similar, but there's no other cases anywhere in the Bible. When you find tablets in archaeological digs that have the same word, using the context, you're able to build a better understanding of the word. And we're going to see that that has a lot to do with behemoth and leviathan. Because in 1929, a shepherd or a herdsman found a cave or a sunken place and found tablets, and went and got someone, and the teachers came and found a library of tablets of the Amorites in Syria. And they have a bunch of ancient stories from the time of Job, world creation stories and ancient God stories that use the same words that are in the book of Job, which means that we now have better ways of understanding what Jesus or Job was saying, because now we know what those words mean. So you can find new truth. That's what I'm trying to get at, or at least better truth over time. Philosophically, modern Christianity has a really big problem with theology because of our system of hermeneutics. And we're going to spend a lot of time today talking about hermeneutics. That means Bible interpretation. How do you interpret the Bible? This has been hijacked by dispensationalism. Now, you know that I've preached and taught a few times about problems with dispensationalism. And mostly I attack them for the two great problems. One is their theory that there are two peoples of God. Jews, literal Jews, are God's people. Christians are God's people. Both are God's people. They're completely separate. God deals with them in separate ways. Okay, that's one problem with them. But another problem is their sensationalistic views on prophecy. Both of these ideas, the two peoples of God and their science fiction prophetic ideas, come from the same root. In other words, the reason that they're wrong is because they have a foundational worldview problem, which is hyper-literalism. Everything they believe in the Bible must be interpreted hyper-literally, as opposed to simple literally. It's this hyper-literalism that causes their spurious ideas, and it got started from Darby in the mid-19th century. Hyper-literalism started as a lack of education, I believe. A number of the early dispensationalists were what you might call traveling preachers who never went to seminary. And for a lot of them are fine. They're good preachers in many ways. However, in order to make up sort of for their lack of education, their interpretation of the Bible is strictly what they see in the words. They don't have books to look at ancient history. They don't have books to look at grammatical. They just in my English Bible it says this, it must mean this because it's in English, and in English it means this. That means that they did not do the study required to find when there were symbols or poetry. Everything is just straight language, see? But that's no longer the case. Now it's just a worldview. Now that they are dispensationalists and they're hyperliteralists, they teach it in their seminaries. So now you get educated hyperliteralists. So education was the reason I think it started from laymen. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be educated greatly to be a great pastor. Many great pastors were not educated, or I should say, it's not that they were not educated, they taught themselves well. It's not the degree on your wall that proves that you're great. It's your understanding and wisdom and interpretation of the Bible that makes you great. Jesus did not go to seminary, but he had a great knowledge of the Bible. It's an ingrained worldview now, though. Once you start believing in hyperliteralism, it's like the tar baby. I look at hyperliteralism as the tar baby of dispensationalism. Once you stick your hands in it, you can't pull them out. You're trapped there. I grew up with that, but fortunately for me, Reformed theology helped me to escape. Now here's a definition of hyperliteralism. This is from the encyclopedias on the internet. The phenomenon of misinterpreting metaphors and figurative rhetoric as being literal. In other words, this is actual dispensational doctrine. You must interpret every Bible passage as exactly literal unless it is impossible to do otherwise. So in other words, they might let you go on trees clapping their hands. Maybe. I'm just joking. They actually will admit that there's an allegory right there, that little phrase, trees clapping their hands. Trees have no hands, they don't clap. So because it's impossible to interpret it literally, it must be figurative. However, any possible other explanation, they'll take it, and that includes prophecy. This is why you end up with these books and movies about the book of Revelation, for instance, where you've got literally giant locusts flying around, wearing armor, shouting curses, wearing little crowns, and attacking people with swords. I mean, that's dispensationalism, hyperliteralism that you get. They can't realize or recognize that that's impossible. I mean, I guess God could do it, but I don't think Satan could do it. But anyway, that's what I'm talking about, this hyperliteralism. Now, why do I disagree with them on that? Well, I do believe in the classic definition of hermeneutics, which has been for 500 years the historical grammatical method. The historical grammatical method is what people supposedly teach, but the dispensationalists add on their hyperliteralism to it. Guess where it came from? Martin Luther. Not only did Martin Luther start the break from the church, not only did he print Bibles in people's own languages, but he also started the historical grammatical hermeneutic. And I think that was one of the biggest things he did. Giving people the Bible in their own language is great. How do they interpret that Bible? He taught the historical grammatical method. And the reason it was important is because the Roman Catholic Church didn't teach a method of that kind. The Roman Catholic Church, in order to keep its iron control over all of the people, they didn't want the Bible in people's language. They wanted it in Latin, so only educated people could interpret it. But their interpretive method was allegorical, and there was another word, pedagogical or something or other. At any rate, what it meant was everything in the Bible can be interpreted symbolically and allegorically. Therefore, even when it looks like it's plain, Jesus healed the palsied man, there's some spiritual meanings there, and only educated people can figure it out. That's why you don't want people having their own Bibles, because they'll interpret it badly. Luther said, no, God gave us the Bible, inspiration included, making it understandable to people. That's why it's not in theological language. You don't have to go to seminary to read your Bible and understand it. And Martin Luther taught that. And so the historical grammatical method, though, where the dispensationalists have gone wrong is they've dropped the historical and gone only with the grammatical. What I see in the word, what the word meant or means to me, is what it means. And they don't bother looking at the history behind it. Now, why is that a problem? Well, think of how some of our words have history behind them and how wrong your interpretation would be if you didn't interpret them this way. Take, for example, the word gay. If I call you gay, you'll probably offend someone. Because now, for the last 20 or 30 years, I guess, gay means homosexual. And so to call someone gay out like that means you're deriding them or something. That's not what the word gay traditionally meant. What it's meant for hundreds of years in English was happy. You're a happy person. Now, how happy gay got to be happy homosexual, I have no idea. But if you interpret the word gay as meaning homosexual, you're missing the fact that long ago gay meant happy. And so in your King James Bible, if the word gay is there, you won't understand it. You have to historically understand the word, how it's developed, to know what it meant back then, not what it means now. And that's where the dispensationalists have gone wrong. They look at the language and they don't look at the history. The same problem they have with baptism. Baptizo means dip in water, so you must be immersed. That's strictly an absolutely hyper-literalistic grammatical way of looking at baptizo. If you look at baptizo through history, that's not what it always meant. It meant put some water on. It didn't mean dip them, dunk them, submerge them, drown them. See? So you have to do both, the historical and the grammatical. And so what I'm saying is that here in the book of Job, we have to understand what the words meant to Job, not what the words mean to you. Your hyperliteralists look at these pieces of Jesus' poetry and say, behemoth, it must be a hippopotamus. because he's got a tail like this, and he's got a mouth like this, and he stands in the water, and he hides under the trees. It must be a hippopotamus. And when they get to Leviathan, his scales are close together. You can't pierce him. He's got big teeth. He must be a crocodile. That is strictly grammatical. They haven't bothered to even try looking at the historical. And we're going to look at the historical and see that I believe those literalistic interpretations are not correct. Another problem with this kind of interpretation is when everyone decides for themselves how to interpret the Bible, you get different interpretations, right? We've got the Baptists, the way they interpret baptizo. We've got Presbyterians, how they interpret it. We have different views. And a lot of people don't like that. Everyone would love, ideally, to have a unified church where we all could just agree and not disagree. But it's not going to happen anytime soon. And it hasn't happened for the last 500 years. But it's not that big of a problem. But here's one reason people take things differently. Just think of culturally and the word you, Y-O-U, you. You can be singular and you can be plural, right? If I'm talking to you, I mean Rebecca when I'm pointing at her. But if I'm talking to you, I mean all of you when I'm talking to all of you. That is a problem with every language. There are many languages where the plural and the singular are the same. And one example we'll see of that is the word behemoth or behemah. Behemoth would be the natural plural for behemoth. In other words, the way Hebrew should have been, or the way their language was, behemah means one beast. Behemoth means 2 beasts or 5 beasts or 10 beasts. But the word behemoth is never used in the Bible for multiple beasts. Not once. It's always behemah and behemah. It's like deer and deer. How many deer do you see? I see 1 deer. How many deer do you see? I see 10 deer. How many elk do you see? I see 1 elk. How many elk do you see now? I see 10 elk. It's the plural and the singular are the same. So if you're from China or a country where groups are more important than individuals, that's cultural, and you read the Bible and it says, you love, you're going to take it as you all love, everyone love. But it's possible that in the Greek, the word you meant you. You personally love, and so you've misunderstood it. Or the opposite may be true. We here are Westerners, we read you as me. We're individualistic. When in fact, many of the times Paul uses the word you, he means all of you. And you don't know that because all you've done is looked at the grammatical word and interpreted it according to your cultural language. The Bible, and the book of Job in particular, the book of Job is probably 4,000 years old. It's the oldest book in the Bible. And there are a lot of words we don't understand. So we really have to spend more time looking at the history. One of the biggest or hardest problems with interpreting the Bible is when you come to poetry, allegory, or figures of speech. Here's the proper way of using historical grammatical interpretation, which we do believe in, or which I believe in, and which Presbyterians generally believe in. If the passage is literal, you read it literally. If the passage is allegorical, you read it allegorically. If the passage is poetic, you read it poetically. This is where the dispensationalists go wrong. There is no such thing as allegory, hardly ever. There is no such thing as figures of speech. Just treat it all literally. And that's where we get our 2 peoples of God and our bizarre end times ideas. So this is why I'm just setting you up to understand why I'm not going to take the strictly literal interpretation that everyone else does of Behemoth and Leviathan. Now, why am I sidetracked on this topic? Because the way we biblically interpret the book of Job is critical to how we decide who Behemoth and Leviathan are. There's a few basic views on who they are. Because almost all modern Christian writers and scholars and commentators are dispensational, they're also hyperliteral. And that's why almost every modern commentary says Behemoth is hippopotamus and Leviathan is crocodile. That is a literal view. They do admit there might be a little poetry in there, but no, it's not poetry, it's just slight hyperbole. It's just a little extra mustard on the sandwich. God added a little flavor to the passage. So it's like a hyper hippo. It's like a hippo treated bigger than he really is what they'll say. So they'll admit there's a slight exaggeration there. But there is another literal view that I think is better. However, I don't still think it's correct necessarily, which is the young earth creationist idea that these are dinosaurs. Now this is actually a better idea, I think, than hippo and crocodile, because it's pretty obvious that they're not hippos and crocodiles. At least the crocodile is pretty obvious. The main problem with the crocodile theory for Leviathan is the whole fire-breathing dragon part. Okay, he shoots fire out of his mouth and causes coals to flare up into flames. I've never seen a crocodile do that, and I doubt that we've ever had a crocodile do that. Now, the young earth creationists will then say, but yes, it's now an extinct dinosaur. All the dinosaurs are pretty much extinct. And we do have examples of similar things happening. Now, here's their similar things, and I'm not trying to mock them. I'm just saying I don't think this explains anything. The bombardier beetle. You've probably seen, if you've ever watched young earth creationist videos, the amazing bombardier beetle, and it is a cool bug. It's a bug who's walking along, a beetle, and when some enemy comes up behind him, he sticks his butt up like a stink bug, and he combines two types of acid in his butt until they pop out, squirt out as acid in the enemy's face behind him. So he pops a bit of hot acid in their face. And so if bugs can do that, certainly God could have made a dinosaur that could do something like that with fire. Well, maybe, but what would be the reason for that, though, is what I said. I understand the whole bombardier beetle thing. He's defending himself. What is the purpose of having dinosaurs who breathe fire? I mean, it's not a normal way to kill your prey. Animals don't cook their food. I've never heard of an animal cooking its food other than humans. We can teach animals to do it. You can teach an orangutan to roast meat. I've seen it done, but they don't eat meat, so they don't eat it. But anyway, what's the purpose of a fire-breathing dragon? It's not defending itself, it's attacking. Fire is a great way of scaring your enemy to run, but not a great way of killing an enemy. It takes too long to burn somebody. He's not going to just stand there while you roast him. As soon as the fire hits him, he's going to be in pain and turn around and run away. And that doesn't help the dragon at all. So at any rate, there's also a bird. I don't know if I put the name of the bird in here. No, I didn't put in the bird. But there's a bird who shoots oil out of his mouth that's kind of yucky smelling. And so it's sort of like a skunk. And if an enemy gets too close, he sort of barfs this nasty stuff in his face and makes him run away. Once again, that's not a dragon. So these are the two highly literal views of behemoth and Leviathan. They're not impossible, and I don't call anyone a heretic for thinking that. It's not a big thing. I think they're in error. But there's more than just translation in interpreting God's words. An exact literal translation is helpful, but the key to understanding the words is how you decide the meaning. In other words, when you read your Bible, the most important thing is that you know what God means. Okay? And this is why we have translations and we have paraphrases. You understand that in languages, you can't always turn one word from Greek into one word in English. We often don't have one word equivalents in the language. Just an example, Eskimos. I'm trying to remember how many it was. I think Eskimos have something like 64 words for snow. And it's depending on the weight of the snow, the color of the snow, how fast the snow fell, how wet the snow is, how dry the snow is. When you live always in snow, snow is pretty important. And so you got lots of words for snow. How do we translate from Inuit into English? Oh, there's snow. That doesn't tell us what the Inuits meant. It tells us what they said, sort of. That's the same problem in all languages. So a paraphrase, the reason there are Bible paraphrases is because the writers believe they understand what God meant, even though they couldn't put it into the exact words using English. That's why sometimes it's good to read a paraphrase, perhaps for your devotions. You might sense better the meaning of a passage than you would from a strict translation. I mean, if you wanted to use a strict literal translation, you could try, I think it's Young's literal translation of the Bible. Young's made a concordance, and then someone else turned every Bible word into an equivalent English word, but it reads hard. I mean, the verbs and the nouns are in the wrong order, and it's a tough read. So all I'm saying is there's a lot to interpreting things. Another reason, we are talking about a book that was an oral tradition. In other words, Maybe Moses, we don't know, but Moses might have written the book of Job. God inspired him to write it down. He might have had a written copy or sort of a transcript, but everything in the book of Job was spoken, except perhaps that first narrative where Job and God talk in the beginning, and Satan and God talk in the beginning, and Job and God talk in the end. Everything else was speeches, talking. Now, what's the difference between talking English and writing English? There's a pretty big difference. If you were to write a book, people do this now a little bit, if you write a book entirely the way you speak, it doesn't always work well, because your brain is capable of a little more formality in language. We're much more informal in our speech. And a reason for that is that when we're speaking, we can communicate a lot of things by our tone of voice and our posture, things like that help you interpret. So I don't have to explain as much. But in a book, if I'm writing about our talk, I have to interpret what she's thinking, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, what she's feeling, in order for you to understand it. Let me give you an example of this. If I say to Rebecca, who's my wife, "Aren't you cute?" Probably she would interpret that nicely. I'm being nice, saying she's looking nice. But if I say, "Mike, you're sure cute today," that probably would not receive the same idea of being a nice thing to say. If I went up to a stranger in the street and I said, "Wow, you're cute," if it was a she might slap me, and if it was a he might slug me. The same words meaning the same thing mean different things because of who I say them to and how I say them. So there's a number of factors in understanding what is being said. That's exactly true of the book of Job. It would be great if we had a video of them talking. It would help us understand. Even if we didn't understand the words, we could read a lot from their body language and such. So this makes Job different than other Bible books. For example, the letters of Paul. Almost everything we have from Paul is his letters that he wrote down. Either he wrote them with his own hand or he had a secretary who he wrote dictation to, which means that they are already more formal. They're meant to be written down and read by someone else and interpreted that way. It's easier to do that in writing than it is in speeches. That's why textbooks are in academic writing style. Everything has to be in the third person. You never say, "I think," in an academic textbook. Everything is, "Scholars believe." You never say, "I think." No. So the book of Job being a bunch of speeches, and they were spoken in a language other than Hebrew. Moses or whoever wrote them down in Hebrew. But we don't know that Job and them spoke in Hebrew. It may not have even been a real language yet. It's related. It was at least a Semitic language. So the book of Job then probably went from one language into Hebrew, and then it went from Hebrew into Greek, and then it went from Greek into English. And all of our modern translations are based on the Septuagint, except ones written in the last 50 years when the Dead Sea Scrolls appeared. Okay, so we already are 3 or 4 steps separated from the original language of Job. And when we talk about inspiration, we mean God inspired the original language. God did not inspire the Septuagint. I believe that God certainly had a hand in it being pretty accurate, because he wouldn't want us to have completely wrong information. So I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying that they're not perfect. Okay? And they get less perfect every time they get translated. That's why we have to study so much to find these books. So thousands of years, languages have changed, meanings have changed, and we don't even know what certain figures of speech were. Let me give you some examples. Not only do individual words cause difficulties, the history may be lost. English and every other language has metaphors and similes that meant something back then that we have no idea what it meant now, what it means now. So take the word internet. My grandpa, 30 years ago, had no idea what the internet was because it didn't exist. Okay? Internet is a new thing. Therefore, we don't have it in old languages, we have it in new languages. If I call you a dweeb, some of you will know what that means. It's from the 1980s. Dweeb basically meant nerd or dork. But these kids, they didn't even react when I said dweeb. They have no idea what I'm talking about, did you? Yeah, see, they didn't know. So that's the same with us. When we're reading Job, maybe one of his friends called him a dweeb, and we didn't know it, because we don't know what that word means. Here's another one, 2 bits. Any of you know what 2 bits is? Abby, do you know what 2 bits are? Yeah, see, she doesn't know. 2 bits for hundreds of years was a quarter, 25 cents. Actually, what it meant was 12.5 cents, because we used to have a coin that we called a bit for slang. And so 2 bits at 12.5 cents each made 25 cents. So a quarter is 2 bits. That's something modern people don't know. There are also historical names that we no longer understand, although some we do that are infamous. For example, if I say one of our politicians is a Benedict Arnold, what does that mean? A traitor. Benedict Arnold was a traitor who betrayed the United States in the Revolutionary War. At least that's believed. If a Supreme Court nominee is getting heavily questioned and criticized by the Senate panel, what do we call that? It's called getting borked. That's because we tried to nominate a judge named Bork some years ago, and the leftists came out and criticized him so much he just had to withdraw because they thought he was evil. So that's what we call being borked. What's a catch-22? You're stuck in a situation you can't win. The rule says you can't be married and claim this tax exemption, but the rule also says if you're married you can't claim this tax exemption. So nobody can claim it, so why is it there? It's a catch-22. That's all based on a book written in the 50s or 60s by Joseph Heller. So these are all historical words that have a historical meaning. Yes?
That's like if you go to a foreign country, you can't say, I was told from Ireland, don't say this word. To us it's a bad word, but
Right.
to us it's a bad word.
Well,
Or maybe I have it reversed, but anyway, I was told do not say this word when you go over to Ireland because it's a bad word to them,
right.
but it's not a bad word to us.
I had that in seminary. When I was my first year in seminary, we had 2 guys from Ireland come, and they were in the room next to me. And they asked me to take them out for a walk and show them around. So I'd led them around part of Pittsburgh, and as we're walking around Wilkinsburg, which is nicknamed Wilkilliansburg, it's a dangerous place, we're walking around, one of the Irish guys looks at me and says, "So John, where can we find a wee bit of crack?" And all the guys on the street look over like, and I said, "Shh, don't say that." He said, "What, I just want some crack?" "No, stop saying that. You're going to get us killed." Apparently in Ireland, a wee bit of crack means where can we have some fun? Crack is fun. And I said, well, crack isn't fun here. Don't be asking for crack. You might get some. So words mean different things to different people. I'm telling you this because every language has specific allusions that mean things to us that won't mean anything to a foreigner. When a foreigner comes and tries to learn English, because a lot of English is slang and metaphor and simile, they don't understand our metaphors. If you say, oh, I'm in a catch-22, they're like, what? They weren't here when Joseph Heller wrote his book. If you say someone's a Benedict Arnold, what? They don't know anything about Benedict Arnold. Yeah.
That's like the other day at work, I was telling them the mic is going to blow out the canister of the vacuum cleaner. I go, suck the chrome off the bench. And the vacuum goes, you and your country doesn't know what?
What was it? Suck the chrome?
I said, well, my chrome, he goes, that's from the movie Electric Cowboy.
Oh, okay.
You would be so strong.
Ah. Movie illusions, yes. So much of American language, including mine, is shaped by movies that are famous, like Star Wars. How many things are now a Star Wars quote that have become part of the language, or Jaws, or famous movie? So one kind of illusion that we're going to be studying over the next few weeks is about ancient gods and mythologies. That's because I believe that Behemoth and Leviathan are names for ancient gods or demons who existed in ancient times. Now you might start to worry because this is often viewed by conservative Christians as a step toward liberalism. But I'm not a liberal in any way. The reason it's thought of as liberalism is this. The first guy who taught this idea in modern times was a German named Hermann Gunkel. And he wrote books in the late 19th and early 20th century. Now for some reason I don't understand, German theologians are always getting us into trouble. It's sort of like German armies. They're just always up to no good. And whenever a German theologian comes up with a new idea, you cringe. You wonder, uh-oh, what's wrong with this one? I don't know why Germans are that way. But what Gunkel did, he was an expert in ancient Assyria. And he studied ancient tablets and manuscripts from Assyria. And what he discovered was there were a bunch of ancient Assyrian myths and religions that sounded a lot like Bible stories. So his conclusion then was that the ancient pagan religions existed first. And then the Jewish priests wanted to make a big religion, and so they turned all these ancient stories into Bible stories instead. And they put God in charge instead of the devil in charge. So in other words, the Bible was formed by people using ancient mythologies and pagan religions. And so the Bible is just a bunch of pagan religions converted into Judaism, monotheism. That's liberalism. They like to do that kind of thing. I'm not doing that. The problem is that Satan likes to take something that is true and twist it. I think Gunkel was on to something. There are strong similarities between Assyrian religions and Bible stories. But I take entirely the other side of it, saying it's not that the Bible stories copied the pagan religions. It's that everyone had the same religion at first. And it was all oral traditions. And what did we have? We had Adam and Eve, we had Noah, and we had the Tower of Babel. We all had the same stories about people being driven out of paradise, sinning. We had stories about serpents and dragons. We have stories about worldwide floods. Okay? And all of these stories, the people at the Tower of Babel, all of their languages were confused and they went all over the world. And they took all their stories with them. And so, of course, the people in Assyria had stories that are similar to our stories. The reason they're similar is we all had the same story. They've just gotten distorted every time they get told. New names get added, new details get added, they get twisted a little. So I think that Satan saw, Gunkel's right, he's found something true, so let's twist it a little. And that's what's happened. But I think he had a kernel of truth. And that if we compare the stories of Behemoth and Leviathan to other stories in ancient religions, including Assyria and the Canaanites, you'll see much better who Behemoth and Leviathan really are. The reason we have a giant dragon in every culture on earth is what? There was a giant dragon some point. Okay? That seems fairly obvious. Unless people just made it up. Why do all of the countries on earth have a story of an ancient worldwide flood covering the earth? Because there was an ancient worldwide flood that covered the earth. Why do we have all these religions with hybrid animals who are like half lion, half bear with wings, hybrid animals? Because everyone knew about the cherubim who Adam and Eve saw outside the garden guarding the tree. Or perhaps even Genesis 6, the sons of God married with the children of men, demons and angels creating hybrid creatures maybe. So the reason that all of these religions have similarities is because they are similar. They were. That doesn't mean they're similar now. So what we're going to start learning next week is that Behemoth and Leviathan are two of the ancient gods or demons from the oral traditions of our early history of the world. And all of the oral traditions are similar because they all came from the same witnesses, Adam and Eve and Noah and the Tower of Babel. They got corrupted over the years. The Jewish Old Testament got written down, and that's why we have a very accurate account. The other religions didn't get written down for a long time. They didn't invent cuneiform until much later. And so since they didn't write it down, they had more centuries of oral tradition, and therefore their traditions went wrong. Ours, the Holy Spirit used writing to preserve our ancient traditions. God did not preserve the ancient traditions of others very well. So I'm not a liberal. I'm saying that the liberals have drawn the wrong conclusion from the right information. And that's exactly the same thing we see on TV now. When you've got two different sides on every issue. You've got doctors who say the mask is useless. You've got doctors who say the mask will save your life. Which one's right? It depends what party you subscribe to. It's the same thing with ancient history. It's the same thing with most things. For the most part, we all agree on what the data says. We don't agree on what the data means. And that's why we have this strange thing about Leviathan Behemoth. We haven't gotten to him yet, but we will next week. But we're also going to start next week talking about the idea of chaos. And that's because Behemoth and Leviathan in the ancient world were known as the chaos monsters. So, any questions about these things, hermeneutics and Behemoth and etc.? We've still got a few minutes.
Like when you need to change, you need to change the oil in your car. You can do it at 3,000 or 20,000. You have to, like you say, nobody has their own decision or opinion.
Right, and most commentators believe the same thing, which always worries me. I mean, in some sense you could say, oh, that's great, everyone agrees. Well, they only agree because they haven't studied it for the most part. So that's what I don't like about it. If we all came to the same conclusion after deep study and after looking at the archaeology, then okay, sure, we can agree. But they haven't. Most commentators are lazy, or pastors, and just take a cursory look at it, and you've got 3 or 4 commentaries, and they all say the same thing, so that must be the truth, and that's lazy. So, anything else? Okay, well, it'll be really interesting the next few weeks, because we'll be talking about monsters and ancient gods. Okay, we'll come back in 40 minutes, and I guess this is not live, so